So I'm here tonight with a really, really special guest. We have Theresa Emmerich Kamper, all the way from, are you in the UK right now?
I am in the UK right now, yeah.
Nice. And I'm really excited for this conversation with Theresa because Theresa's work has been something that I've been following for the last 5 years or so. Before it was pre-alone. And Theresa actually came over here to Australia last year and taught a week-long animal processing, buckskin, and flint knapping course that we were lucky enough to go to. So, hello, Theresa, and thank you for joining me tonight.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk to you again. It's lovely to see you.
So, do you just want to give everyone a bit of an idea of what you do and what your world consists of? Because it's a lot of cool things, but yeah, give people a rundown of what you do.
Sure thing. Yeah, my bio is a little bit, it's eclectic. So I have been practicing ancestral skills for over 30 years now. My current job consists of sort of three prongs. The first one being I teach how-to, hands-on practical courses in mostly animal-related subjects, such as processing animals, skin tanning, clothing manufacture, and making things out of primary animal products. Primary meaning the animal has to die in order for you to acquire it. I don't deal with secondary products such as wool and milk and those sorts of things. Secondarily, I do demonstrations for open air museums that represent different periods in prehistory. Obviously, once I get to metal, that's no longer my specialty, but I will occasionally rock up and do Iron Age tanning only, or potentially Viking Age, something like that. And then thirdly, I actually analyze prehistoric leather artifacts for traditional glass case museums. And that is me.
Wow. And there's so
I have
much...
a PhD in prehistoric animal skin tanning technologies. So yeah, that's the whole third prong with the museums bit.
Which is like the coolest thing ever, like bringing that prehistoric technology into an academic realm and looking at it from that lens. I think, are you the only person in the world with that kind of PhD in prehistoric leather?
To the best of my knowledge, in the English-speaking world that I can, actually look at, I am the only one with this specific PhD, which isn't that unusual, actually, because PhDs are very, very unique. Basically, a lot of people who have a PhD are the only one with that PhD. But no, there's not a lot of leather analysts out there.
Yeah, it's just like so incredible. And yeah, to get us kind of started, let's start at the beginning of your journey and kind of what got you into this stuff. Was it something when you're a child, the way that you grew up? Like, what led you to be studying prehistoric leather?
Well, the leather kind of came a little bit later. What really got me started was just wanting to run around and live in the woods, like My Side of the Mountain, which is a book I used to love when I was a kid. I think my parents probably read it to me before I read it, honestly. Wow. My dad told me cattail roots were edible. I was like maybe 6 or 7. Went down to the local cow pond, dug a bunch of them up, drug them home, and was basically gnawing on them in the yard. When my dad got home, he was like, ooh, you're gonna get giardia. Let's cook those. So he cooked them, and that was like basically the extent of his know-how as well on what in the world to do with them. Gave them back to me and said, have fun. So it was, building shelters down at the creek, although we called them houses, not shelters. Shelters is kind of a new word. We built houses. They weren't forts. We weren't defending anything till later when the boys would come try and tear them down. Then we did defend them in ways and means which probably today would be considered assault, but that's all right. It's kids. It's a while ago. Slingshots.
Harmless.
As far as the leather goes, though, I had Native American friends when I was a kid. I grew up a mile or 2 miles off the edge of the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, and I absolutely loved the powwow clothing. And when I was 11, I just really wanted a pretty leather dress. No deeper than that. Don't ask for deep meaning. I was 11. I wanted a pretty leather dress. So didn't know where to buy leather. Well, I'll just make leather. that was an interesting process. It took me about 2.5, 3 years to come up with what I now know to be dry scrape brain tanning. And I managed to do that
Wow.
via word of mouth and trial and error. I'm not going to
Wow.
say those first skins were good, but I did make my leather dress.
And you were learning along the way, like at such a young age as well. Was there any other kids around, like who were into that stuff, or was that kind of unique to you?
The tanning definitely was just me. I would
Yeah.
drag some of my friends down to the creek in Lander, Wyoming. If they ever hear this, they'll laugh because they'll remember. And yeah, we built our houses, we played in the water, we gathered clay, we made pottery, discovered if you stick it in the sun it cracks. So we dug holes in the ground and then built shelves inside the holes and put it in there to let it
Ooh.
dry so that it dried slow enough it didn't crack. We had no idea how to fire it. We never got that far. We weren't allowed to make fires at the creek. My parents did draw them up. It's like, no fires. Wyoming, wildfires, very dry place, not much humidity. Yeah. So yeah, so there was a few people that were willing to come on my adventures with me.
Wow.
Once I moved to Cody, Wyoming, not so much. That was kind of the portion of my childhood where I did most of my outdoor things by myself. Yeah, which I really
Wow.
didn't have a problem with. It meant you got to screw up without anybody seeing you.
Yeah, that's so epic, having the opportunity to really, yeah, grow up pretty much outdoors and learning the outdoor skills. Because from memory, was your father a hunter as well?
Yes, yeah, my
Yeah.
entire extended family hunts for the most part, as does a large portion of the population in the Western, well, the entirety of the US for that matter. And yeah,
Wow.
growing up in Wyoming was, looking back and having traveled as much as I have now, it was the opportunity that most people just don't even have, just to have that much publicly
Yeah.
available land to
Yeah.
do basically whatever you like within a reasonable set of regulations.
It's really interesting, like from an Aussie perspective, looking over into the US, because even just watching like Alone, and like you can see how ingrained that outdoor living culture is over there,
Mm,
where I feel like over here it's not quite the same. Like you've got the hunting culture and the fishing culture, but they're all quite different. Like, and I feel like the
mm.
wilderness living skills in the States is like the hunting, trapping, shelter, bushcraft, like all of that kind of stuff. And it's really epic.
Yeah, I think the hunting and the fishing and maybe backpacking are fairly integrated into the general worldview of most of the US,
Yeah.
or most of the people who live in an area where they can do that. I wouldn't say people in the middle of New York City probably fall
Yeah.
within that demographic, but it's all about your environment, right? But the actual going out and living in a natural way, I mean, not just with a tent and a bunch of modern equipment, that's a new thing. I'd say within the last 20, 25 years, where that's
Mm,
really come to the fore, where people really started to want to do camping in a different way, right? Where they really
mm,
want to go out and they want to integrate with the natural environment in a more intimate way,
mm.
where you're not protected by your nylon all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's so epic. Like even the primitive skills culture over in the States. Like,
Yes.
do you want to? Because yeah, there's probably a lot of people that don't over here that don't even know that exists over there. So do you want to talk a little bit about like your history with some of those primitive skills over there and how that kind of shaped you or helped you learn or things like that?
Absolutely, yeah. So the United States has a fairly, I mean, it's recent in terms of the length of time period that humans have been in the United States. Obviously,
Yeah.
indigenous cultures have every skill under the world and have right up until contact and quite a long way past contact, and in some places still do carry on all these skills.
Mm.
However, uh, some of the are you able to edit this?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to pick my words here. So some of the non-indigenous people who decided they really wanted to learn these living off the land or living with the land skills that we started calling primitive technology to begin with. People used to call
Mhm.
them Aboriginal skills. Aboriginal
Mhm.
in this case just meaning first,
Yeah.
in the same way that primitive just means simple, not
Yep.
necessarily, or even if you want to take it back even further to its Latin, it's prima, again, first.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
first skills, and now today mostly get called ancestral skills.
Yeah.
So there's a long-standing community, I would say 50 years plus,
Wow.
of people who have been gathering together and teaching, learning and teaching all of these different living with the land skills. And they run the gamut from flint knapping to hunting with your own bow and arrow that you made, basketry, pottery, edible plants, medicinal plants, right up through like making soap and blacksmithing, the more simple living skills or sustainable living skills, even if they're not like, say, pre-metal era, Stone Age. Yeah, which is an interesting contrast with Europe, because within Europe, the majority of this sort of ancestral skills technology stuff came out of the experimental archaeology movement. So it's always an attempt to replicate archaeological originals. And so there's not so much of a focus on integrating that with your daily life, whereas the ancestral skills movement in the United States learned from archaeology and took skills from various indigenous understandings. But the goal is always been more to make it a part of their everyday life, to make clothing that they can just wear whenever, wherever, rather than it needing to be archaeologically accurate to a time period or an area.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I was just going to say, you can really see like it when you observe the culture of the ancestral skills over there. Like, people are really living those values, like with the food and the crafts and the clothing, and it's really, really epic to see that.
Yeah, it's nice that that subculture exists and is growing. Yeah, there's enough interest in it that one of the larger skills gatherings, of course, is Rabbit Stick in Idaho, which is always the second week in September. It's not the first one I went to. I went to its sister gathering, Winter Count, which is in Arizona, second week of February. And the first time I went, I'm not sure I was 18. I would think I was just 18.
Wow.
So just before I was 18 or just 18. And that was the first time I'd met up with other people that liked to do what I did. And they have really, over the last, 25 years, become my family.
Wow.
Another second family. And so, yeah, if you ever do get the chance, they're fantastic. There's skills gatherings all over the United States. And from what I understand, you guys have one as well.
Yes, so we do. It's definitely nowhere near as amazing and grand and diverse, because I feel like the skills teachers over there are so, like, there's so many, they're so abundant. And I feel like over here, the skills teachers are quite spread out and kind of doing their own thing, but it's definitely, we're definitely going to make it happen because Australia
fantastic.
needs that.
Rabbit Stick started somewhere as well. Rabbit Stick started out as a gathering for instructors to teach each other.
Wow.
And it then blossomed out into a thing where you had all of these instructors, not only sharing knowledge, skill sharing with each other, but also skill sharing with what then became students. And then it's just grown since then.
Naturally.
Yep.
Wow.
I think they have finally had to cap the numbers. So I can't remember if the cap is 400 or 600, but they did. The Westcotts finally did say, okay, I love that everybody wants to learn this, but we're losing the community feel when it gets too big.
Massively.
Yeah. And it just makes all of the logistical considerations much more challenging. So
Totally. Yeah, it always changes it when something like that, like a smallish gathering gets huge. Like it brings in a different, it just makes it too hard to manage, like when it gets that big. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did you do some of your first like teaching workshops at these gatherings, or were you teaching outside of that? Cool.
I mostly did my first, and interestingly, I think the very first course I ever ran was at Winter Count, and it was teaching buckskin bikini top making.
Cool. No, that's a nice
So
amount of garment
very
making. It's not
highbrow.
too overwhelming.
Yes, absolutely. And it was super fun. It's just such a silly fun course. And
Yeah.
from a seamstress standpoint, there's a lot of different shapes and sizes which need to be catered to. So
Oh
it
yeah.
was an interesting challenge to come up with, a style that feels and looks and fits well on each person. So
That's a
yeah.
really, yeah, that is a really good segue into like, yeah, buckskin clothing and your journey with garment making. Because yeah, last year before Theresa left, I ran down to her hotel room with my buckskin, was like, please, let's help me shape something. So Theresa was like fitting this piece of buckskin on my body in the hotel room, cutting it, and then that allowed me to then have this kind of template thing to work with and create some kind of wearable singlet that was fitted. And holy moly, I don't think I would have been able to do that without your guidance there. So please tell me, yeah, some of your beginnings with that journey of garment making, and if you were just like buying clothing from the op shop or something and then cutting that up for templates, or did you learn from a clothing maker? Because tanning skins is one thing, but then making quality clothing with them is a complete other thing. And even the way that the skin sits on you and everything. So yeah, how did you start with that, and what does that look like for you?
Well, I mean, I didn't start with buckskin. We'll put it
Right.
that way. I've always been sewing. Um, my mother has a box full of all the crazy weird things that I sewed over the years, including a mermaid costume that I swam in a pool with. Um, the ice skating outfits that I'd make for my little sister and I, without the understanding that commercial ice rinks, the air is warm, just the ice is cold. And then we attempted to go out ice skating in Wyoming in December in these things. And we lasted all of about 10 minutes. Where you're going, okay, well, that doesn't work. But dresses and skirts and notoriously a loincloth made out of old diaper material when I was about 10 or 11. I remember that one distinctly. I actually think I found it in one of my mum's boxes of just stuff she'd stored. That was, oh my God. I made a loincloth out of a diaper.
That's really great.
Excellent. But just that practical trial and error is really what got me started on pattern making and understanding body shape, and how if you take fabric away from someplace or add fabric in, what that does, how you make something two-dimensional, piece of cloth or buckskin, into something three-dimensional.
Right.
And then when I started sewing with leather, I actually started with a little bit of commercial tan. I think it was probably aluminum tan now looking back, which doesn't have the same flex and movement as fat tans do, but it still does have the thing that old leather has, where it has more stretch in one direction than another, because it's an animal. And parts of us need to be able to stretch more than other parts. There's a reason that belly skin has a looser fiber structure and is able to expand and contract better than, say, the back skin, which is static for most of a body's life. So learning those kinds of things from just using commercial leather, and then moving on to chamois at one point, very briefly, probably when I was in my early teens, messing with chamois. And chamois is the only commercially produced oil tan that most people are familiar with. There are other commercially produced oil tans. They're usually heavy, thick leather for specific sorts of rucksacks and that kind of thing. That introduced me to potential stretch, which is a characteristic of all fat tans. And I use fat tan as the term to designate things that are tanned with brains and egg yolks and cod oil and sour milk and any of those emulsifiable oils that have the potential to oxidize, become aldehydic compounds, and produce an actual tan. There's some debate about whether that does or does not happen. That's another podcast all on its own. But So that potential stretch is one of the things that has to be taken into account for making buckskin clothing. Potential stretch just means that you don't have boing boing, that's elastic or static stretch, right? Where it moves and it comes back. Potential stretch is when you put a fabric under tension, and over time it keeps stretching, called creep in some linguist or some terminology. So your seams on clothing, on buckskin clothing, are basically like the framework of a house. They're the thing that actually holds everything else in shape. So clothing needs to be designed around that framework if you don't want to end up with things like, you know, bell bottoms, saggy knees, diaper butt on your buckskin trousers, arms that twist on your shirts, skirts that end up way longer on one side than on the other side. And they sure as heck didn't start that way. And some of that is also to do. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, like, with that, is that inevitable, or if you stitch it really specifically, will that hold its shape forever?
So two things will make it hold its shape forever. One is how you cut your pattern out of the skin. It is an animal, and it stretches differently in different portions of the skin.
Yes.
So yeah, if you try and keep things, wear things like it was on the animal, so the spine in line with your sternum, the spine in line with your back, the spine in line with your arm, and don't cut things out at angles. You can't bias cut leather. What will happen is it will just likely over time twist.
Yeah.
Because you'll have one part that has more stretch than another part.
Right.
They'll stretch unevenly across the piece of the pattern. So that cutting out, in combination with choosing your stitching material so that it doesn't have any stretch. If you're sewing with leather lace, then you pre-stretch it to the point where you've taken out all of its potential stretch. It cannot move anymore. Therefore, neither can your seam. If the seam can't move, the rest of your clothing cannot move. If you set your seam structure up in such a way that it frames the garment.
Wow, it's so technical, isn't it?
You know, it's technical in the way that anything is, where it sounds really complicated until you do it once, and then you just go, oh, done.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. I can roll with this. I understand the theory now. Now I can just move on, off on whatever little rabbit holes and sidetracks you like.
Yes, but it's like, if you don't know those hot tips, and it's like, it changes everything. You create a totally different garment.
Absolutely, absolutely. Things like, when you get into things like pockets in buckskin as well, they become another little conundrum, because they also like to stretch.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And then the holes that you put into fat tan skins, if you make a hole, it's there forever. It doesn't go away. Yeah. Especially if you cut holes.
I remember hearing that a few years ago, that's why awls are so important for buckskin, is because of the way that they break through, or they move aside all of the skin structure, rather than like cutting it, like slicing it.
Yes, they just push the fibers out of the way.
Yeah, it's so cool. But it's like little things like that if someone that was a garment maker with regular, like, other materials tried to transfer some of that information onto sewing and stitching with skins, it's like a totally different ballgame.
Absolutely, yeah. If you put a seam that doesn't work in a piece of fabric, you just unpick your thread and you're good to go.
Yeah.
If you do that in buckskin, those holes are there forever.
Yes.
And if you look really close on my favorite long sleeve shirt up on one shoulder, I missed at one point when I was punching holes. So along this bit, just behind it, there's another line of holes, and I look at it every time and go. But we all do it.
Yeah, it can add some kind of character to this
exactly.
shirt.
It's the mistake for the gods, you know, like when people used to put an intentional mistake in weaving, or put an intentional mistake in pottery, just so that it wasn't too perfect.
Yes,
I'll go with that.
Handmade. Yes, it's rustic.
Yes.
So I want to backtrack a little bit now and just get you to talk about the different tanning methods, like bark tanning and fat tanning and things like that, and maybe just Yeah, I know we could probably do a whole podcast on just that topic because you're so knowledgeable in that area, but maybe just, yeah, give people a brief summary of what each of those methods are.
Sure, absolutely. So staying away from some of the modern sintans and things, we'll just pretend like these don't exist.
Yes.
There are basically four skin processing families or technologies under which there's lots of sub technologies. So, or subtypes. Let me say that again. Okay, so staying away from sintans, which are really modern, and we'll just pretend like they don't exist for now. There are four major tannage technologies under which there are many subtypes. So those four technologies are rawhide. I know it's not a tan, but it's a product that's used everywhere by everyone in the world. And it's really, really important. It's very useful. Your second one, and I'm kind of going through prehistory as these most likely developed. You've got rawhide, and your next one is going to be what I've termed fat tans. Like I say, there's some contention about the word tanned in there. That's fine. Under which you get things like egg yolk tanning, brain tanning. Some of your marine mammal oils have the potential to tan like this, soured milk. The thing that really seems to, and lecithin, thing that seems to designate these tans is that if the oil is self-emulsifiable, it potentially can create this type of tannage technology. So again, now we have rawhide and we have fat tans. Next one that's popping up is vegetable tan, which within the craft communities in the United States and then working out from there in the ancestral skills communities has gotten called bark tanning quite a lot. They're the same thing. If you hear that word vegetable tanning and you hear the words bark tanning, they're the same technology. It's just two names for the same thing. So this uses tannins, which are a secondary
byproduct. This uses tannins.
Oh yeah, this will be fun to edit, right? So so this technology uses tannins. Tannins are a secondary polyphenol that's produced by all higher order plants, and they produce it as an antimicrobial agent. So that means it keeps fungus and bacteria and insects from eating them as much. Now, what tannins have the ability to do is cross-link collagen. Collagen is the main protein from which dermal tissue skin is comprised. So when collagen contacts tannins, tannins can build little bridges between the fibers of the skin. They produce the tannage technology that we call vegetable tan or bark tan, right? This is a soaking process. It takes a long time, or it can take a long time. It can be sped up with agitation and making very strong solutions, very strong tannin solutions. Your fourth technology is mineral tans. So prehistorically, all we really have evidence for is alum tawing, which is done with alum. If you're not familiar with that, you can actually buy it in most grocery stores. It's a double metal salt of aluminum, potassium. Actually, I'll come back to that. It's alum.
Yeah.
it's early in the morning.
Chemical compound.
Yeah, exactly.
No, so fair enough.
I'm like aluminum potassium bisulfate. I think that's what it is. Anyhow, I got my book over here. I'll go check my own book. Anyhow, alum, a combination between alum and salt, like actual table salt, produces a compound that will also hold the three-dimensional structure of the dermal tissue. So skin is made up of all these fibers and they sit in sort of a three-dimensional matrix, right? The alum and the salt can basically create a barrier inside. They're actually a solid precipitate that makes the fibers not collapse into a two-dimensional structure, which is stuck together, which is what rawhide is. So that's the only mineral, and we don't call that a tannage either. We call it tawing. It has a special name because if you put it in water, you wash out the salt and you wash out the alum, and you go back to something that's not even rawhide. It's
so it's not fully preserved forever because if it gets
preserved forever as long as you don't get it wet.
Right. Okay.
So it doesn't rot under normal use conditions.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but can't deal with being wetted. Yeah.
So can I ask, when would have that kind of come into our human history? Because that's not very convenient, like having skin that can't get wet if you're outside a lot.
Right. Okay. Well, there's lots of places in the world where skin doesn't get wet because it's really
True.
dry and it only
True.
rains once in a blue moon. And why the hell would you go out in the middle of the rainstorm that only happens once in a while and lasts 20 minutes? Just don't
Wow.
do that. So we've definitely got evidence from the Romans. We have some evidence from Egypt and some of the dry sites there, although
Wow.
there is a theory that alum was being used as a mordant, something, an affixation agent for coloring leather, and that perhaps that's actually how somebody noticed that changed the properties of the skin and went, oh, because again, this is a cause and effect thing. It just takes somebody with the ability to recognize cause and effect, enough curiosity to try it out again, and enough tenacity to keep going till they figure it out, right? That's tanning. Yeah. So that is the only mineral tannage we have evidence for in I don't even want to call it prehistory, early history, classical history.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because once it gets wet, it washes out. So it's hard to nail down when that pops up. And some of the early leather research wasn't nuanced enough to probably be picking some of those things up.
Right.
Now, today, I would say 90% of the leather you get is a mineral tan, because the other mineral salts that are used for tanning are aluminum-3, chromium aluminum-3. So the other metal salts that are used for tanning in our modern tannages are aluminum or aluminium, depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
Chromium-3, I think it's zirconium can be used. And they're what make up the majority of the commercially produced leather today. Now, there's lots of, oh my God, that's chemical tan. All tannages are chemical. Everyone is made up of chemicals. The entire world is chemicals, right? So this gets a little ridiculous. Just because it's a chemical does not make it bad. Just because it's natural does not make it healthy. We've actually managed to heavily pollute river systems in the United States from vegetable tanning factories because they put so much effluent into the water that they made the streams eutrophic. Yep, bark's natural. Doesn't necessarily make it okay to just dump it all over the place.
Yeah.
Now, potentially chromium-3 is going to be worse to dump all over the place. And there are definitely arguments to be had or to be made for what happens when offcuts of chrome tan gets put in a dump, because chrome is very solidly chemically affixed to the collagen. It does not come out.
Wow.
It's chemically bonded. When you're wearing it, it is not soaking into your skin. That's not how this works. If that was how that worked, then you'd have tannin soaking into your skin. Although some people get that because they don't wash their bark tan very well. That's a different thing. That's unaffixed tannin.
Yeah.
So yeah, the leather itself is, and even the process making it is not necessarily as problematic as sometimes it seemed to be, because these heavy metal salts are actually easy to precipitate out. Can be precipitated out of water. They're expensive, so it behooves the companies to go ahead and recoup that because it can be used again.
Right.
The problem is if those rules are not in place or not followed, and you end up with this kind of stuff being dumped into the environment, then yes, we have problems. As well as some of the solvents used to degrease skins in the commercial industries. There are definitely parts of this process that could certainly be more environmentally friendly.
Absolutely. And with the end product, like if you're comparing, say, chrome tan leather to veg tan leather, from what I've heard, and I obviously haven't fully researched this, but I've heard that the veg tan will actually last a lot longer and be a bit more durable. Like its lifespan will be a bit longer than chrome tan. Is that correct?
It depends on what you're doing with it and where the chrome tan comes from, how well tanned the veg tan is. There's a lot of factors that would go into that. What's nice about veg tan is that as long as you don't put it in acidic conditions, it is pretty darn hardy. It doesn't rot in wet environments, but neither does chromium tan. What vegetable tan doesn't deal with particularly well is acid. It doesn't deal with sweat and salt particularly well, because our skin mantle, we're actually quite acidic compared, and vegetable tan is already an acidic tannage technology. So you're adding an acid to an acid, you'll end up rotting the armpits out of your shirt. So I personally think of vegetable tan as outer clothing, and I think of fat tans as inner clothing.
Makes sense.
Because fat tans don't care. They laugh at sweat. As long as you wash it out once in a while, because salt is just hard on things, dirt is hard on things.
Yes.
If you don't wash your clothes, the actual abrasiveness of salt and dirt make your clothing last less long. It's not me being a crazy clean freak. It's actually a maintenance issue with your clothing. Don't wash it. It will fall apart faster.
And I've noticed that even with the armpits of my little singlet that we made, that I've needed to wash that because it gets quite like crunchy as well. And I can imagine over time that would deteriorate quite quickly.
It'll absolutely make the fibers brittle, and you'll start breaking fibers. It's just full of salt. Sweat is full of salt and various small mineral groups. It's none of which is meant to be left on or in skin. You're meant to wash sweat off of you. You're also meant to wash sweat out of the skin clothing you wear. Oh, it would be so fascinating to like look into prehistoric like clothes washing techniques, and how they did that, because obviously once upon a time in various places around the world they were only wearing like buckskin clothing and things like that. And so have you ever come across any research about that? No, none, which is so sad, and I would love to dive down that rabbit hole one of these years when I'm not doing 20 courses in a year to try and eat. No, I think that the whole concept of hygiene in general within groups who are living in natural settings or in more natural communities, I think is really fascinating. Because obviously our idea of hygiene now is kind of like we've put this up at this crazy standard, which is unnecessary. But hygiene itself is not unnecessary. It's just, what is that bell curve, and where do people fall on it? Indigenous and non-Indigenous and everything in between. And how does it differ between different environments? That's the other thing. You can get away with all kinds of things in a really dry environment that you can't get away with in a really wet environment, and vice versa.
Totally.
So I think that's an absolutely fascinating avenue of research. Someone out there, that's a PhD, do a PhD.
There's so many rabbit holes to nerd into, isn't there? It's
exactly.
Great. Yes. Yeah. So while we're on the theme of buckskin clothing, I really wanted to ask you about your time on Alone, but specifically with your clothing choices, because it's really cold. It was really cold where you were, and I'm really curious, like, how cold can you go wearing just buckskin, and how does that work with layers and things like that? And I know that you would have taken other stuff out as well, but if you're doing like a proper Stone Age immersion, I know that you have before, in a really cold climate, how would you do that with buckskin? And how did that go for you when you were out on Alone?
Cool. Well, Alone and doing a completely Stone Age type of immersion are very different venues. So for Alone, I took wool, merino wool, underlayers, a medium weight, a thick weight, and then I had my buckskin shirt, and then I think I had a fleece. I had some sort of other shirt. I love that I can't remember that, but I bought all my equipment for Alone like less than a week before I had to go out to the induction camp, because I was working right up until then. So
my gosh, that's so crazy.
my level of preparedness for that program was insanely bad, in all honesty. It was just like, okay, this is the time I have, we do it all right now. Woo! And I was picking up equipment as I was driving through Europe in different countries and having friends help me. So a friend of mine in the Netherlands really helped out a lot. He gets a big thumbs up for that one. Cheers, mate.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah, so I had another shirt, and then I had a vest, or a gilet, or waistcoat, or whatever people call these, in body warmer. I don't know how this single garment can have so many different names in so many different countries, but a shirt with a collar that zips up the front and has no arms.
Yeah.
That thing.
Best.
Yep. Okay. Best. Cool. Which are such an underrated piece of clothing. They're so awesome because they leave your arms free, and then you can put another very heavy something over the top, and you're not bound up walking around like, you know, that kid from A Christmas Story, you know.
Yes.
No, right. So for me, I just had a fleece vest along. I really actually wanted to have made a fur vest, but the fur vest I had was way too thick.
Right.
Coyote fur vest underneath of the parka that I made, I just would have cooked in the Arctic Circle, let alone British Columbia.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I ended up with just this kind of odd fleece vest. Again, I had that bought for me by the crew from one of the shops they were going through on their way to camp.
Love, like, can I just say, like, that's so amazing, and how well you did out there, considering you didn't spend like months and months practicing and preparing. Like, well done.
Yeah. I think people sometimes forget some of us do this for a living.
Yes.
And I was teaching. I was teaching all over the place. I'd been in like 7 countries before I even got close to the point where I could actually start getting ready. I was trying to do research a little bit here and there, but the actual physical ability to just go and buy what I needed and figure out what I needed was something else. But yeah, so vests and then a large jacket over the top. And for alone, I made a parka, which was Arctic fox.
Wow.
And so it was 2 layers, Arctic fox for the inner, for the warmth. And then it was grain on fat tanned reindeer and vegetable tanned reindeer hair off for the outer surface, because I knew British Columbia was wet and I needed something that could at least deal with a little bit of water. Yes. And buckskin is not that thing. Buckskin is chamois. It looks at water and says, please, please come to me.
Yeah. Yes.
And I will also hold on to you for a very long time.
Yes.
So it dries quite slowly. Yeah.
So I'm just going to skip. I'm going to come back to the Alone experience, but I want to skip to, traditional, I guess, folks that wore buckskin. Were they just not in super rainy climates, or were they preparing the buckskin like with the grain on, or how and what was going on there?
There's a little bit of both. I think one of the major things is we think we have to go out in the rain and do things.
Yeah. Most
places, if you don't have a boss telling you you have to go do that, and you're not on a crazy time schedule, why would you do that?
Yeah.
If it's warm enough, you just take your clothes off, and then you go out and you do whatever the things are. I think the level of body modesty was very different, as you know, when we see with Indigenous people, it depends. Obviously, it runs the gamut, but they don't seem to have nearly the hang-ups that some of modern society does, and there's no reason to think that ancestral peoples would not have been similar, and that sometimes bodies are just bodies, and you gotta go butcher that deer. It's raining, I need to do it now. It's not that cold, I'm taking my kid off. Right. Yeah. I'm just going out in my loincloth, whatever, so that you don't have to dry out all of your buckskin clothing. Yeah, that makes sense. But yes, a lot of places are not as wet as Northern Europe. Northern Europe is a very weird, little annoying microclimate in the world, as is sort of the Pacific Northwest of the United States. And you look at people there, they used a lot of combination clothing. They used some absolutely amazing dog fur and cedar bark woven fabrics. Buckskin was used, of course, but there's all kinds of adaptations for that environment, and it's reflected in the clothing as well. Wow. So you want to look at rainy climate adaptations, really. Northwest coast of the United States up into the Aleutian Islands, that whole little arc in their curve of that coastline is all very wet. Some of them gets up to very wet and cold. Wet and cold is a really, really challenging environment in which to make functional pre-industrial revolution kind of clothing, or pre-modern even. Yeah.
Is that like when you're talking about some of the like the polar bear parkas and things like that? Is that kind of
that's further north even?
Right.
So that's when we get in. Okay, when we get into double layer fur, where you have a set of fur clothing that faces in, so fur is in, and a set of fur clothing that faces out. Then you're talking Arctic. That's not even subarctic. This is that kind of clothing is way too warm for most places, actually. Like significantly too warm. And it's traditionally people didn't wear it inside their shelters. You know, they had indoor clothing that, if you look up some of it in various museums, is fascinating. Yes.
I just think it's so incredible, like the innovativeness of humans throughout history, and like it's like so Arctic here, but it's okay, let's just start wearing double layer polar bear, and it's like wow, it's just really incredible where the history and the walks of life that we have come through to get to like where we are today. It's so fascinating.
I think people forget a lot of times when they think archaeology and they think the past and they think prehistory, they still have this 1970s diorama of Ugg the caveman in their heads. And they don't understand that when we're talking about these time periods, you know, from darn near 1 million years ago, we're anatomically modern humans. We're the same thing. We're the same entity that we are now. And so is every single group all the way around the world. They all have the same capacity for creativity, for problem solving, the, you know, all the innovations that have been come up with for dealing with the different environments and social customs that form around that. And and you know, just coming up with stuff that's just for fun. I love how often we forget that humans like color. We like pattern. We are aesthetically motivated. If you live in places where it's warm and clothing isn't a big thing, then hairdos happen, and tattooing and piercing and amazing jewelry and those types of aesthetic things. When you get into places where clothing becomes more necessary because you're simply not physiologically capable of being in that environment without it, then the aesthetic expression starts working its way into the clothing, and you know, the patterning, the decoration, and still hair. We're all about our hair. Humans in the world have done some amazing stuff with hair. The hairdos are fantastic. Actually, you know, our modern hair is actually pretty darn boring. Actually, I often wish I could just spike mine up with some lime and just go running around like, this is where I'm my go-to for today. I can have my lime mohawk.
I'm sure you could get away with it in random cities and stuff.
Probably. I mean, people today was like, oh, post-punk, interesting.
Yes,
nice. You're like, oh no, punk was already retro to picked.
Yes. I just think that it's so fascinating, like how so many people have kind of forgot that that's where we've come from and that's our history, and we're actually so much more creative and resilient as well, like living in this kind of time of creature comforts. I don't think it's the most amazing thing for us humans, because it's really not showing people what they're actually capable of anymore. And I think things, some of those experiences that you've had, like going in alone and the Stone Age immersion as well, like tell me how you kind of, because I know you've grown up doing that, but I feel like alone would have been like, is that probably the longest survival stint that you've done?
Absolutely. So I mean, how often do you even get the ability financially to just drop out of your life for 3 months? Right. Plus recovery time.
Tell me how that was. Like, obviously, talk about the challenges, but talk about like what happened to your mind when you were out there and not stimulated by other human interaction. Like what was going on? What were amazing? What was really difficult besides the food, the starvation aspect?
I mean, the starvation thing is obviously the only thing I'll touch on with food is just because we had so many restrictions. There was lots of things there that I would have been eating had those
Yes.
restrictions not been in place. Those restrictions have nothing to do with production, nothing to do with the program. They're actually all to do with the place you're in. Those restrictions are part of the land use of the place in which they have that season. So everyone's all like, why didn't production let you do? It's like, that's not their rules. I think they would probably love it if we could shoot everything. In all honesty, it'd make much better TV.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, much more interesting at the end of the day. But that's just not how it is. So it was an interesting experience to look around you and see these resources, most of them running around smiling at you with their little tails. Yeah. And you're not allowed to eat them. They're quite literally off the plate. And you're just like, you know, hello, Helga, my moose. How are you today? You're looking very delicious. Oh, you little squirrels. How wonderful.
You weren't allowed to eat squirrels?
No, we were not. No, they're considered a fur. They're considered a fur bearer, so an animal which is trapped for its fur in British Columbia. Therefore, if you're not from British Columbia, you're not allowed to harvest them.
Whoa!
So that was very fun. It's like, oh, my life for a squirrel's pole, which is a way you say it.
Oh my! So what were you allowed to eat? Fish.
Yes, if they were under a certain size, over a certain size, and not salmon.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
No baited hooks. No live bait. No barbed hooks. We were not allowed to fish in the streams at all. Yeah. Like I say, there was a load of restrictions.
I did not know that about your particular season. I did not know it was that restricted.
Because it's never mentioned. I honestly wish that it's one thing I wish the production would change. I wish they would at the beginning of a season put out that, you know, these are the restrictions with which the participants dealt. It would just, I think it would make it more fun for the viewer to see the process where people try and figure out, okay, how do I work with this? What do I do? What do I do with this puzzle missing all these pieces, right? Secondarily, it would probably help us out, honestly, as the participants, if we didn't have to deal with quite so much idiocy afterward. Why didn't you just trap all the squirrels we always see in the background? It's like, do you think that if I was allowed to do that, that I would not potentially have been doing that?
Yeah.
So
the dark side of social media and the
absolutely armchair experts are everywhere, and you know, you just have to you grow a thick skin and you learn to nod and smile.
You'd have to. You'd absolutely have to. And at the end of the day, no one knows that experience as well as you do, because you're the one actually going through it. And I think a lot of people forget that. It's a really weird concept with TV and watching something that is as real and raw as Alone, like literally surviving, but then not actually knowing all of those kind of background limitations and restrictions and things that then still it's a funny part of human psychology. I really like watching it on TV and being like, oh, why didn't you do that? It's like,
it really is. And then you start looking at like the concept that people also forget is that we are required to film 8+ hours a day.
Yes.
So I was out for 69 days times, say, 9 hours a day of filming. You think how much footage that is? I think the airtime I ended up with on TV was something like 40 minutes. So the entirety of my story, the international world sees of that 69 days comprises 40 minutes, maybe, and I might be being generous there, of actual airtime.
That's full on. It's such a different world, the TV realm.
It is, and it's interesting. It must be quite, I can't imagine being the editing team. Like, how in the world do you try and
pick and choose,
show someone's pick and choose and show someone's story and have it look good for TV, so that, you know, because it is a TV program, they want things to be a certain way, but still feel like you're doing justice to someone's experience.
Totally.
Because a lot of the production crew are interested in doing that. They want to tell your story in such a way that doesn't make you feel like that's not what happened when you see it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And there are definitely some liberties taken with order of events and that kind of thing, which,
Oh, I bet.
it's TV. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, totally. I remember watching the season 2 of the Australian one actually recently, and they weren't allowed to eat eels over in New Zealand.
Yep.
I like watching them pull in, like, because obviously eels are quite easy for the most
Yep.
part to catch, and watching them pull in the eels when they're like in starvation mode and then having to throw them back out. I can not even
Yep.
imagine like the heart-breaking moment of letting that thing
Yep.
go. Like, yeah, that's just cruel.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, that's. But apparently, what I heard, and that could be wrong, is that the reason they weren't allowed to eat eel is because they were there under a commercial license alone as a TV program. Therefore, they fall under a commercial use of the land. So it's a different set of rules than if they were just there on their own.
Really?
Because
Oh,
yeah, there was apparently there was quite a lot of confusion as to why they weren't allowed to eat the eels,
yes.
and that's the answer.
Oh my
I would fact check that one, but that was what I got through the grapevine. So
That's so interesting. Wow. Wow. So when you were out there, like what were some of the things that allowed you to really kind of keep going, even in those moments of starvation and challenge? Like, yeah, tell me
coming up
about
with
it.
projects.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah,
yeah. Keeping yourself busy.
I really enjoyed my time out there. Not very
Yes.
often in your life do you get the chance to be paid to
Yeah.
do what you want, when you want, how you want,
For
without
an
anybody
extended,
else's input at
yeah,
all.
yeah.
Yeah.
For an
So it was
extended
actually
amount of time.
for an extended amount of time. Like it was a bit like a vacation. It really was,
Yes.
except that you had to lug
That's
3 cameras around and film all of it. That part I hated.
awesome.
But I loved the experience. I am not a huge fan of filming myself,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate because we are coming into the wide world of visual
Content
media,
creation and all of
content
that.
creation, and it's I just don't enjoy it unless I suddenly win the lottery and can just employ some person to wander around after me with a camera creating content. I don't know that I'm ever going to be that person that really
Yes.
gets the filming aspect out there.
Yes. Yeah. It's an
I
interesting.
like my in-person life.
Yeah, totally. And the skills you teach are like, yeah, they're like practical, hands-on. You need both of your hands to be doing that.
It's so hard because I've been discussing doing an online course with a platform,
Mm-hmm.
and back and forth, trying to come up with creative ways in which to convey haptic feedback, so touch, in an audio visual medium.
Yes.
And
Wow.
it's probably doable to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be young enough to travel all over the world and teach people hands-on forever. I probably do need to have some sort of backup plan where I get some sort of passive income so that when I can
Yes.
no longer teach, I don't just die in a road ditch somewhere. But,
Can't see that
so,
happening.
yeah, I mean, nah, I'd definitely run off to the woods for a while first.
Yes. Yeah,
But
well, a lot of the other tenors are doing that, like, and it seems to be pretty taking off, like Matt Richards stuff, and I think Winia did a little. Oh, I don't think she did tanning. I think she just did like sewing or something, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and the vegetable Mark, where'd that come from? Matt is doing vegetable tanning courses, and veg tanning does lend itself a little bit
Right.
easier to a course.
Right.
On one hand, it's more tricky because it's a longer process. Like I say, there's a lot of
Yes.
soaking involved and waiting.
Yes. Yeah.
But at the same time, if someone forgets about it or doesn't pay attention and they come back, it's probably not going to be rotten.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the various fat tans they are challenging to run a online course in the way that he's doing the vegetable tanning.
Right.
But I haven't gotten to take his course yet, but I have heard wonderful feedback from it.
Yes, me
saying
too.
that it's just great.
And all of the end results look really epic as well. So that's always a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. I like that he's branching out into doing hair-on and the dense versus soft and some of the things that it's not just one tannage technology, it's a tannage technology, yes, but you can direct it in many different ways to produce completely different end products.
Yeah.
And thank God it's finally hopefully shot in the head, that weird concept that you can't vegetable tan hair on. I was like, who came up with that?
Yeah, I did not even know.
Not? Yeah.
I did not even know that was a thing. Like, but I guess
for a long time. Yeah, people were it just hadn't made it into the craft communities outside of some of the sort of like Sami and some of the Scandinavian tradition of tanning. They do rub on veg tans that are hair on and have for ages, right?
Yeah.
But it just hadn't made it into some of the craft communities in the more southern parts of the ancestral skills and bushcraft and whatnot until
that's so interesting.
Yeah, maybe 10 years ago, honestly.
Wow, that's pretty fresh. Because do the tannins, like, don't they shrink the hair follicle? So the hair, if you do have that fur on skin in a tannin solution, it's making it like tighter, so it's reducing slippage?
So slippage is a bacterial issue. So you'd still, no matter what, you need to get your skin, if you're going to do hair on, it needs to be done quickly. As soon as that thing is gone from a dry state to a wet state, bacteria starts to do its happy dance. And the ways that you arrest that are by freezing, salting, or tanning, right? Vegetable tan, if you get the solution strength strong enough, it does two things. One, yes, it is astringent, so it does tighten fibers. It shortens them and makes them slightly fatter. That's why veg tan gets slightly thicker when you tan it. It's because you can't, mass has to go somewhere. If it's astringent enough that a long fiber gets shorter, it then also has to get thicker.
So cool.
Yep. Now, and then secondarily, that tannin, like I say, is antimicrobial. So as soon as you get it in a strong enough bath, you are arresting, or that's your goal, is to arrest the development of bacteria, or to slow its development down long enough that your tannins can penetrate through the dermal thickness of the skin and prevent the bacteria from damaging both the dermal structure and the hair follicle root. So,
which is so cool. And just on that note, I've been doing a bit of research on the indigenous uses of tannins here in Australia, and just how widespread, like, they were used for like treating burns and wounds and like kind of topical things, and even ingesting for sore throats, and if you have diarrhea, like helping reform the stools again. And I just think it's so cool that this one, is it like a chemical compound? Is that what a tannin is?
A tannin, it's a molecule.
Yeah, I just think it's so cool, the myriad of uses throughout history. And I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Australia has some of the highest tannin concentrated plants in the whole world. I think here in Africa or something.
So black wattle, which is, let me see if I get this right. Is it Acacia mercii?
Yes, like well done.
Yeah. Cece told me last time I was there, and I'm like, put that in my brain, put that in my brain.
Yes, well done.
So that is one of the most commonly used bark concentrates, tannin concentrates. So it's farmed, it's grown all over the world. This tree. It's a really quick growing tree. When it gets to a certain age, they're cut down, the bark is stripped, it's powdered, put in a centrifuge, and the different molecular weights of tannins are spun out so that you only take the tannins that are the ones that actively attach to, there's a better word, but attach to your collagen fibers. And then that is then dried into a powder. And that is what you get when you buy a tannin concentrate or a bark, when people call it bark powder. It's not really, it is bark powder, but it's very specially treated bark powder.
Yeah, and that's mind-blowing, because we have that tree like down the road from us, and we use that, and we just get the bark and chop it up and put it in, and that's strong as it is. So I can imagine that concentrate would just be like next level strong.
It is. I mean, some of the concentrates are 70 or 80% tannin, which in nature doesn't exist, right?
Wow.
But some of those, the tree itself, I believe, can have up to 30 to 35% tannin.
Wow.
Nope, it's not right there. I was gonna say I might have my book right here that actually says exactly what it is, but I don't. It's in that bag under my desk. But yeah, it has a very high tannin content naturally.
Wow.
And the brand name that one goes under is Mimosa. It's
Hey.
not a mimosa tree necessarily, but yeah, that's the brand name. But if you buy mimosa powder, you are buying black wattle.
That is so trippy, because that is like what they, yeah, I think Matt Richards has even like talked about that and everything, and that's so funny. He's on the other side of the world.
It's grown all over the place, and it is one of the major commercial production tannin production lines. You can get chestnut bark. There's chestnut concentrate, sumac, but that comes from leaves and is literally powdered leaves. So it is just leaves.
Wow.
So yeah, it's great.
A lot of work.
It is a lot, but they're sumac. It's easy. You strip them down in the fall and dry them out, and then put them in a bag and stomp on them, right? Yeah, there's all kinds of fun ones out there. I mean, tannins. There's so many different tannins. The outside of pomegranate rinds have been used. The caps of acorns, willow bark, spruce bark, Douglas fir bark, things that you wouldn't even think because they're conifers. Larch, birch was used in. Doesn't have that high of a tannin content, but it was used because that's what they had in some northern areas. And yeah, and it's not even just trees. It can be Tara is the pods. Acacia pods can be used. The outside, dock roots. Tormentile that was made almost extinct in Scotland because it was dug up so much for tanning. Now it's protected.
Oh my gosh!
No more digging up tiny roots.
That is so cool. We've heard that one of the bracken ferns here, I have to totally forget the botanical name, but we've heard that has rhizomes that are high in tannins, but we haven't trialed it yet, but we've been wanting to for ages. So we're gonna, but it just like, it doesn't make sense for us to get something so little when we can get a whole bunch of bark that's in abundance down the road. But I still eventually want to try it just to see how that goes.
And if you do, message me before you do, and I'll get you the information. That's not a higher order plant. They're a lower order plant. So I can't remember off the top of my head because veg tanning isn't exactly my specialty. I do it, but they either don't have cacciatol tannin or they don't have the hydrosoluble tannins. So I think it's the catechol, so the condensed tannins that the lower order plants don't have. But can't remember off the top of my head. But I have a book. Tell me that.
Yeah, I'll definitely get in touch.
You have my book. You can probably look.
Yeah, I have your book. That's right. I feel like we could keep talking about skin stuff, but I do want to talk about your time on surviving the Stone Age as well.
Sure.
That kind of, I know that was just like a little snippet, but it kind of encapsulates a lot of the Stone Age skills that you practice, like your flint napping and traditional bow hunting and do you want to just talk about some of the skills that were on that show that you were practicing?
Perhaps I should first say what that was. So surviving the Stone Age.
Yeah, maybe not everyone knows.
Yeah.
Cool.
This is the assumption that everyone's seen this thing. No, okay, so there was a program that I did back in 2019 with a group of 7 other outdoor professionals who ranged from bushcraft through to ancestral skills. And we all went out for 4 weeks in the Rhodope Mountains of Bulgaria, and we lived as people would have lived. Well, the premise was 45,000 years ago, but if you notice that there's bows and arrows and clay pots and a couple of gourds floating around and vegetable tan in there. So we were demonstrating skills that could have been used by anatomically modern humans as they were moving into the European subcontinent. including a few skills that kind of came along quite a bit later in time. That's all right.
But it was still all land based. It was all land based.
It was all land based, of course, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had film crews following us around. It was a little bit like being, animals at the zoo, but with direction. Now and again, like, can you please change the angle of how you're making that fire so that we can see that a little bit?
Wow.
Yeah, of course, no problem. So yeah, we hunted, we gathered, we traveled, we maintained and repaired gear, we demonstrated, we made fire every day. Many things made it on the program that were great. Many things didn't make it on the program that were also great. It would have been lovely to see the group hand drill fires. Most of the time we weren't bothering to make fire on our own, because why would you when you got a group of 8 people?
Totally. And that was probably a more accurate depiction of how it would have been made, like with a group rather than one person burning up all of that energy.
Exactly right. It was 4 people on a hand drill. It's 30 seconds and you've got a coal. It's just like, yeah, let's go. Yeah. Now we can have breakfast. No one wants to wait for their coffee that long, or in this case mint tea, but cool. So we made a lot of the equipment that we took out with us beforehand, obviously. We had rations that we had also produced beforehand and taken with us. So we were always supplementing as we went. This was not, the point was not drop people into an environment and see what happens. It was to replicate the reality of prehistory, which is when people move, they don't do it with no food.
Yes.
No one does that. They don't do it in nothing but their underwear. No one does this. And
they don't always do it alone. They're always with a group.
Basically never do it alone. Alone means you're something horrible happened to your group. Or you did something horrible to your group and you were banished.
Yes.
Probably meant, unless you find someone else to take you in, you will die. There's a reason that we live in groups. We're not herd animals, but we are social animals. We are cooperative. The whole concept of the lone hero is kind of a modern and somewhat of a Western modern concept. It was interesting as the alone is so much that compared to surviving the Stone Age, which was the polar opposites. So they're an interesting dichotomy to have worked on both programs.
Absolutely.
So we fished somewhat unsuccessfully in the Big River, partly to do with the fact that we didn't end up with a lot of time for fishing. There was a lot of filming and a lot of finishing up of equipment and whatnot there. I'm not sure why we never ended up making a weir just downstream from our camp. There was a riffle in a big river. That would have been the way to go about doing this, but I just don't think we ended up with the combined time where we could all just be like, everybody picks up 20 rocks, we put them all in a line, now we put the sieve net at the end of that, chase some stuff down this giant river that's full of bass, and then we can have some disgusting fish for dinner. Yay!
Were you using I forget, were you using bone hooks and like just plant fiber fishing line?
Yep, gorge hooks, plant fiber, and actually sinew as well, fish lines as well as basket traps. And we had some small sections of net.
Wow, so cool. And I remember the weight of your packs was quite heavy. How heavy were these? Because they're like basket backpacks. Like what is there a name for those? Pack baskets or something?
Pack baskets. I don't think anyone had a pack basket. Maybe Lynx did. I don't remember anyone with a pack basket. Everyone had packs. They were either leather packs or like mine was a modified Otzi. So that's the Iceman that was found in the Alps. If people aren't familiar with that, there's a 5,000-year-old body who has a broken backpack frame with him. So I made something of a similar ilk, and then basically did a blanket pack. So my sleeping gear I rolled everything up in my sleeping skins and just strapped it on, and off we went.
Wow.
Yes, some of the weight was a little bit ridiculous. Mine was 21 kilos. We found that out after we did all the hiking, and I was all, oh man. Potentially I could have shared out some of the rock because I had the rock along for flint napping. So
oh my God.
You know,
And you're
I wasn't
climbing
quite
like
the
pretty,
smallest person in the group, but I was
no,
close.
you're climbing like pretty steep mountains and everything as well. Like
Hmm.
that
We
was
were, we were.
wow. Had you
Yeah.
been to that part of the world before?
No, I had not. That was my first time in Bulgaria, and it was really gorgeous. At least the parts of
Yeah.
it we saw.
Yeah, I've heard
Yeah.
that there's like a very minimal population of humans in that area, and that is a lot of kind of wild
Yeah,
places.
I mean, parts of it
Yes.
are, yeah. Basically, the parts you can't farm is where there aren't very many people,
Right.
right?
Because it's too rugged.
As everywhere, yeah. So there's
Yeah.
lovely areas there that have low populations, and then there's lots and lots of agricultural land. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That would have been how, if you could do, oh, I feel like I know the answer. I was going to say, if you could do one of those two experiences again out of alone or surviving the Stone Age, what would it be? But I feel like I
Definitely
know.
surviving the Stone Age. Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. Because it's with other people and you had more of the gear and
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's more my end of things, you know.
Yes.
The concept was education, the
Yes.
concept was scientific experimentation,
Yes.
the concept was
Yeah.
wearing and testing all of this gear, looking at
Mm.
how it performed, whereas alone was modern tools. Some of my clothing was my own make, but
Yes.
I did really enjoy building my house on alone and all of the problem solving. That was my favorite part of alone, was problem solving. It's
Yeah.
just, you wake up in the morning and go, okay. I mean, your problem is always food, but it's not always your only problem, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah. You can pick and choose which problem you're going to solve that day.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It
I'm
was a
just sitting there
very,
coming up with, 10 ideas and then wheedling them down as to that one will take too much energy. That one's just stupid. Yeah, you don't have the stuff to do that one without having to get 9 million other things together. So that leaves, yeah, that one might work. We shall see.
the shelter that you built was pretty incredible. And from memory, you were replicating a traditional shelter.
So yeah, pit houses are used all over the world,
Wow.
in places where the ground allows for it. They're
Mm-hmm.
not they're not often used in really wet places for kind of the obvious reason, though they could be, as long as you berm and bank
Yeah.
outside enough that you don't have
Mhm.
water running in. But if you have a really high groundwater, like water level, then obviously you're not going to dig a hole in the ground, you're going to get a swimming
No,
pool. But
absolutely.
they have been used on basically every continent except for Antarctica. They've been used from places as cold as the Orkneys in the upper Scotland, around around the entire subarctic and Arctic. Their winter houses are semi-subterranean.
Wow.
So to desert areas where the idea is to keep it cool instead of keep it
Mhm.
warm. So
Mm.
just the concept of harnessing the constant temperature of the earth to help
Yes.
moderate the temperature of the air inside your shelter without you necessarily having to actively heat it using the only resource you have, which is fire or your own body heat.
I
So
guess it's a prehistoric way, or I should say, mud brick building is a more modern way of doing a similar thing, achieving a
yes,
similar thing with the thermal mass. That's really cool. I never thought of that
yeah,
before.
yep. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was well worth it. When it was
Oh,
really, really cold, I was sitting around inside in my underwear and a tank top,
oh, wow,
Yeah,
wow. Because how cold
pretending
did
my roots were something else.
you? How? What was the coldest temperature that it got out there?
I believe we got -20 Fahrenheit a couple of
Wow.
times, and I don't know if that's with or without wind chill. That's when they did actually show it. I went out picking rose hips, basically in a
Wow.
blizzard with the wind howling. Um, Not because I was hungry, but I'd spent a really, really long time making that parka, and I
Mm,
basically spent the entirety of the show and the season sleeping on top of it because it was not cold enough there to wear it. That thing was way too hot. So I was like,
wow.
how do I get this on camera? I want my
Oh my,
parka on
yes.
camera. So the answer is do something stupid, apparently. So I went berry picking in a blizzard, and there you have it. I have my parka.
I cannot believe that it wasn't cold enough for you to wear that. Like, yeah, that's so,
No,
yeah, wow.
I
Well, that's
mean,
probably a good thing though, that it wasn't
yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
honestly, I almost would have preferred it colder, because the place we were in was one of those annoying places that went from freezing to not freezing to
Right.
freezing to not freezing. So you go
Yeah.
from ice to water, water to ice to water.
Oh,
Again, you get into that issue with the clothing, where it's like,
yes.
do I put on a raincoat today, or do I put
Yeah.
on a parka today? What am I doing? And if I'm
Wow.
a mile and a half from camp and I'm gathering, or attempting to hunt the nothings, then I don't want to get caught out there without the right thing. But you don't want to carry a bunch of crap with you because you're
Totally.
tired, and your
Totally.
camera equipment already weighs a ton.
Wow.
Yep. So
So
there's
for
definitely some
any,
interesting considerations.
oh, absolutely. It's such a fascinating show. For anyone who hasn't seen it, you're on season
8.
8. Yeah, season 8 on the US. I think it's the History Channel
This
alone.
is History Channel, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I definitely highly recommend watching that. I remember being very excited when I saw that you were going to be on it, because yeah, I'd already been following your work before that, and I was like, yes, like she's going to do some cool stuff on there. And even though, yeah, it would have been good to see more of you, at least we still got to see snippets of you practicing your skills and what you do.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't get a huge amount of airtime. I'm not really sure what to chalk that up to. Maybe gathering isn't that exciting, because I guess it's not, but I did live for basically 69 days on plant food, which is kind of nuts. And it would have been
It's
nice to
so,
have seen more of the that's not just the gathering of it, it's the processing of it. That's
yes.
actually, there's a huge amount of processing that goes into plant food to make it bioavailable, to make it digestible, to make you
Yes.
able to even eat the bulk you need to be able to pull the caloric content out of it. Also, there's probably some to do with the fact that I am crap at filming myself, and maybe they just didn't get that much usable footage. So
yeah, it's an
there are
interesting,
options.
it's an
Maybe I didn't
interesting
cry enough on camera.
that's true. It makes good TV. Big emotions. It makes very good
But
TV.
I'm a pretty level, happy person, and that didn't
Yes.
really change very often out there. You had your moments where you're just like,
Yes.
screw this fishing. This all sucks.
Yeah.
Why? Why does this lake
Totally.
so challenging? Why is it so shallow? Why are the fish out so far? Yeah, etc., etc. But I
Did
went through
you
a
get
couple of days where I was homesick, which was really weird because I couldn't decide where I was homesick for. So I sang a little
yeah.
song, and that made it on camera. Cringe. My dad now calls the orphan song.
I remember
To be
you were
fair,
walking along the beach and you were reminiscing about a time there was some festival or something over in the UK or something like that. I think that was the same night. And yeah, I
yes,
remember
it's
that.
the 5th of November is Guy Fawkes Day in the UK. So they celebrate the foiling of the attempt to blow up Parliament by Guy Fawkes. And
Oh,
in
wow.
Ottery St. Mary, which is this little town just near Exeter, they have this somewhat insane tradition of putting tar-lined barrels on their shoulders, which they light on fire and then
Whoa.
run through the streets of Ottery St. Mary. The only people who are allowed to do it are people who are from Ottery. I believe they have to be there for 1 or 2 generations, something along those lines. But anyway, I went every year to it because it's such a fun event. And whilst I was out on alone, I was like, "Oi, it's the 5th of November."
Yes.
So I went and made a torch out of pine pitch and a stick, and then did running the tar barrels on the beach in British Columbia, while going like, "Woo!" Because you
That's
gotta
so
entertain yourself
good.
somehow.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I loved it. Um, I wanted to touch on as well because I thought it was really cool your recent adventure with, I forget her name, but another fellow primitive or prehistoric skills lover, where you made the rawhide boats and you
Yes,
sailed
that's
down
Sarah
a river.
Day.
Yes.
Yeah. Yay. Yeah. So Sarah Day and I, who is Memma the Cave Woman, if you're looking on
Yes.
Instagram, and she's well
Yes.
worth a follow for certain sure.
Yes.
We made 2 rawhide canoes, so baskets shaped like a canoe covered in rawhide. Think coracle, but long and skinny. I wanted to go forward, not in circles. And we loaded it up with all of our Stone Age gear, and then we set off and we paddled 217 or 219. I wish I could remember these numbers. I'm an archaeologist, but I'm terrible with numbers. Kilometers of the Thames. The goal being to paddle from the source to the sea. So we started at the highest navigable part, which is up above Cricklade, actually, in the UK for a canoe. And we paddled all the way to the Australese Sea Scouts. We didn't quite get to run the final tidal section. Our time ran out as I was a key speaker for an event in Denmark. So I had a 1-day turnaround from being on the river to rocking up in Denmark and talking.
Oh my goodness.
So that was quite funny. And our safety boat, our safety boat fell through. We didn't have the time. We were both absolutely exhausted as well.
I can imagine. Because how long was that from point A to point B? A couple of
weeks. I think it was 10 or 11 days that we were on the river. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 10 or 11 days. There were days that we paddled from 8 in the morning until 9 at night, because we had an east wind, which is the opposite standard direction for the wind in the UK. So we were fighting a headwind the entire way. Days when we didn't have wind, which were all of 2, we made 7 to 8 kilometers more than we would make in half the time than we would make on the days with the headwind, because the canoes sit so high in the water. They have such a high free fall because they're just incredibly buoyant. We did catch a lot of wind. So we either needed to add more trade goods to our canoes to make them sit lower, right? Or just be luckier with the wind. We had sails along that we actually deployed 1 time or 2 times maybe. That was super fun. We basically tied big grain on reindeer hides to a stick, like hair off, obviously grain on, and then I just stuck it in the bow of the boat in a coil of rope, and then held on for dear life with my feet propped against the front, and it was amazing. And then Sarah ruddered in the back.
That is so epic. That it would have been a very, very fun experience. How long, hypothetically, can you have, and what kind of rawhide were you using? What animal?
Cow.
Right, because that's nice and thick. Because I was going to say, how long could you have that vessel submerged in the water before, I don't know, it starts degrading? Because I know cow is very thick.
It is, actually, cow is too thick. If I had an option of having an animal the size of a cow, it's the size that's the issue. Right. You don't want to be stitching much together if you can help it, because any seam is a leak point. So young cow is what I would call kips. The word is a kip, so it's like a not fully adult cow, is kind of ideal in that the skin isn't so thick yet. Yeah. So the boats are lighter and are easier to sew, and but they're still the same size, right? It's not so much about the thickness of the skin as it is about drying it out frequently. Yes, they really need to be thoroughly dried out. I would say every 5 days is what Sarah and I hit on. And really, for the optimum performance, they need to dry to some degree every afternoon. We really needed to be stopping about 4 o'clock in the afternoon every day, pulling the boats out of the water, getting all the, you have to get, unlike a modern canoe, all the gear comes out of the canoe. The canoe does not sit in the water. The canoe has to come up on land and be tipped up on edge and allowed to dry as much as it can overnight, which was one of our conundrums. There's only so many places where you can pull a canoe up the bank to camp on the Thames. The Thames is heavily populated.
Wow.
Camping along the edges of the Thames is potentially more or less legal, depending on how one looks at it. Having fires, we did bring a little fire pit with us that was made out of like a little aluminum kind of like fold out fire pit so that we could be within the letter of the law.
And it's for the sake of experimental archaeology, right? It's for educational purposes.
Yes, you would think that governments might potentially be more amenable to giving out special licenses for that, but it's a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of chasing your tail to try and get things.
Wow.
So honestly, we were like, you know what, we'll bring the stupid little fire pit, we'll do it that way, and we'll clean up everybody else's fire mess on our way down the river. And people who obviously don't know how to clear a fire when they're done using it. But
wow.
and then we'll document the whole way. So we did, and there's quite a lot of video out there of that trip. And I think Sarah's got a blog as well, which
awesome.
I do not know the name of off the top of my head.
But if people want to find her, it's Mema the Cave Woman.
Yes, Mema the Cave Woman on Instagram, or I'm sure you could Google Sarah Day.
Yes,
experimental archaeologist. I'm sure she'll pop up. Yeah,
and she's even on. I think I have her on Facebook too. She's everywhere.
Yeah, Sarah with an H. Yep.
Yeah. Wow. So would you do a thinner skin just so that it can dry out quicker? With everything else, did it work well? Like it still kept its buoyancy and everything, and it still worked well?
Yeah, everything was good, but a thinner skin would dry faster, which would be really important, and it would exert less pressure on the frame. So rawhide, as it dries, can exert up to 40 pounds per square inch of pressure.
Wow.
Thick rawhide like cow. So there's a reason that when you start looking at skin boats around the world, that the majority of them are made with timber frames. As in when you think of kayaks and umiaks and the various different Middle Eastern boats that have been cased with rawhide over, and they've been used in various parts of Africa. Skin boats get used all over the place. They pop up all over the place. But yes, there's a reason most of them have timber frames outside of coracles, which are round. So of course the stress is evenly distributed around a circle, so they handle it better. But,
wow.
Yeah.
Super cool. Your life is so full of wonderful, amazing adventures. It's really great.
I do like it that way. Absolutely.
Yeah. So later this year in October, Theresa is coming back over here for your second time yes, and we're doing a week-long using the whole animal and fat tanning, and for us up here through Wild Beings it will be a little bit of pouch making at the end of that. And then you're also doing a 2-week or 2 separate courses with Gordo from Bushcraft Survival Australia. And what are you doing with that course?
So one of them is the same as yours. So the deer course is actually using the whole animal, followed by a grain off fat tan buckskin 3-day. And then the additional day at the end for that is pouch making a small bag that teaches you to actually work with this type of leather specifically. The second course, I believe, is kangaroo. And so it will be using the whole animal, but with a kangaroo. It'll be fat tanning grain on, as we all learned last year. The grain doesn't come off of kangaroo skins when you use the wet scrape method at all. And
they still make with the grain on beautiful buckskin.
Beautiful. They actually remind me of reindeer. They act a bit like yes.
Really?
And then so the additional day at the end of that one is going to be some coil basketry.
Amazing. So we are so thrilled that you're coming back over here, because like you and I have spoken about before, these skills are really not super alive yet in this country. So yeah, very, very exciting. All of those 3 courses are sold out. So I'm sorry, anyone listening, you have missed out for this year, but it's going to be a yearly occurrence by the look of things. So they'll always be next year.
Always be next year. And absolutely.
Yeah, do you want to share a little bit about your visions for the school that you were trying to make happen overseas. Tell us about that.
Okay, so I am actually, it's kind of, the ball is rolling. I
Yeah.
am purchasing property in Sweden, in
Yeah.
the middle part of Sweden. Honestly, I think it's probably a little bit below middle. Sweden is a very long country, with the intent of creating a center for ancient technologies, where I'll be able to run long expedition length courses, as well as bring in craft experts from around the world to teach courses in whatever specialty they happen to have.
Wow.
And also, for the first time really in my life, have a home that I own and is all mine. And
you can have skins and dead things everywhere.
I can have skins and dead things everywhere. And you know what? If I wash the dishes, they're still washed when I get home.
Yes. Oh, that will feel very good. Yeah, that will feel very good.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah,
is there a timeline for this to move forward?
I'm hopefully purchasing a small place this July. Now, this is just my way of entering into the Swedish bureaucratic system. It's
right.
An interesting setup, and I'll need to live there for a little while. And it's also just living there for a little while is going to give me a lot better access to looking at land and making sure I end up with the plot that I really want, that's going to do all the things that I need it to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm going to be buying a small, what is likely going to be a vacation cabin with my parents, who are coming over to help me look, for 2 weeks in July. It should be a hilarious trip, as we'll all be in my van. And Swedish real estate moves really fast. Basically comes up, you go look at it, and then you send an email to the real estate agent saying, I bid this much. And then the owner says yes or no. Wow. And that's it. That's how it works. From everything I can read and gather, and what I talk to from people who have moved there and bought things, I was like, well, that is a unusual but very simple and straightforward system. I kind of like it.
Yes. Without all the myriads of paperwork and everything.
Yeah. But it all moves really fast. So, you know, I've been looking at properties all winter thinking, oh, that's amazing. Won't be there when I get there.
Wow. Right.
Because it just all turns over.
That is very, very exciting. And I know that Will and I will definitely be making a trip across the oceans when that
Yay!
happens.
You would be so more than welcome.
Yes. So tell people how they can find you and about your book as well, and any other resources about you.
Absolutely. I will just do this thing, because otherwise I'll totally misquote the title of my book. So again, my name is Theresa Emmerich Kamper, and I am easily findable on Instagram as the handle traditional_leather. On Facebook, I'm pretty certain I'm Theresa Emmerich.
Yeah.
And my email is via my website. My website is theresaemmerich.com. And my last name, I'm sure Ava can put that in the notes for this, is spelled Emmerich. So it sounds like a K, but it's not. And then I also have a book, which I'm just going to hold up like this.
Determining Prehistoric Skin Processing Technologies, the Macro and Microscopic Characteristics of Experimental Samples, Dr. Theresa Emmerich Kamper. Because yes, Theresa is a doctor, everyone, just to let you know, which is very cool.
And if you need something that'll make you go to sleep at night, anything past chapter 5. You got it. So there's one chapter. There's one chapter in here that's actually on how I tanned the samples for the PhD. Chapter 3 is all about the archaeological evidence for the various species that I chose. Some of the beginning chapters have a lot to do with why you choose what you choose for various leather projects. Everything else is really designed as a comparison guide for museum conservators who deal with leather. This is not a how to tan book. Stay tuned for that. As I'm working on it.
And
So
it's still cool for people that have a basic understanding of how leather works. It is still pretty cool to flick through, and especially
correct.
the you talked about like when you did a urine tan thing in there, and that was really, really
I
cool and random.
tested the urine tan
Yes.
concept, as this is a thing. Yeah,
Yes.
that's used in lots of different parts of the world. And it
Yeah.
is, yeah, the conclusion is that it's more of a pre-process than it is a tannage technology. Yes?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, just before we finish everything up, like I just have to say, like I have started like backyard, very basic tanning like 5 years ago, and since doing your course, Theresa, especially with the buckskin, oh my goodness, I like the pre-dressing processes of getting the pH and everything, and it's just absolutely, I'm still in disbelief of how beautiful and soft those buckskins were. I was like, did we really do this? But it's very exciting. Like just a couple of those tips from someone that's been an expert in this field for so long can just help you propel so much further. So super, super grateful for your knowledge and excited to keep learning with it.
Well, I am really excited that it helped that much. And yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It's amazing. Trial and error is a way to learn. It is
Yes.
probably the least efficient way to learn.
Yes.
So, learn a little bit, go away, practice it. Come back, learn a little bit more, go away and practice it. That's the
Yeah.
way you get good at stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yay. Well, thank you so much, Theresa, for coming and hanging out and having a chat. It's always a lot of fun hearing about, yeah, your life and what you're up to, because no doubt, yeah, what did you say that you're teaching very soon again somewhere?
I am I am demonstrating at an open air museum in Sweden, in
Wow.
Votiviken. After that, at a place called Halekes, which is on the very southern coast of, and forgive my pronunciation, anyone who's Swedish listening, Lake Van Ern.
Wow.
I am teaching a fish and fur course. So it's a 3-day course where you learn to vegetable tan fish skins and fat tan fox furs. Right. And then
Cool.
after that, I am in, where am I? I'm in Belgium, Germany. So I'm teaching a fur course in Germany, in near Saarbrücken. And then I'll be in France for 3 courses, one being clothing making. There's a clothing course.
Wow.
Yep. And then a moccasin making course, and finishing
Oh
up
my
with a
goodness.
using the whole animal. As far as I know, the using the whole animal is already full, but
Wow.
all the other courses do still have spaces. Easiest way to find out about them is, again, head to my website, theresaemmerich.com /courses.
Amazing. Well, I know that, yeah, I already feel like we'll have to do like a longer course when you come here next year and do some clothing making as well.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, maybe we'll have convinced enough people to tan enough skins that we can just move them into
Yes,
clothing making. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, we'll make that happen. Well, yeah, thank you again so much, Theresa, and I hope that you get a good rest before you go back out there and share all your knowledge with the world.
Thank you very much. That'll be Friday morning, so no rest for the wicked. All right. Thanks very much. We'll see you later.
Thanks, Theresa. Stop recording.